Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. This happened back in 2020 when I was stationed in Germany. I'm a British Army corporal for context. I'd been married to my wife, Sarah, for about 18 months when I was deployed to Syria. Sarah had a job with the British consulate on base and got to know pretty much every Brit and their spouse. One day, our convoy was targeted by a roadside IED. While threats to coalition forces weren't uncommon, being directly targeted felt more personal for obvious reasons. That was also the day I found out about an RAF guy back in Germany who'd tried to hit on Sarah. I found him on Facebook and, still feeling raw about nearly getting blown up, messaged him saying, "If you go near Sarah again, I'll make sure you regret it the next time I see you." The following day, one of my superiors, who was also RAF, messaged me on Facebook. "Hey Mike," he wrote. "That guy you threatened came to my office complaining. He could have reported you to the MPs. Consider this a friendly warning." I replied, "Thanks for the heads up. It won't happen again." "No worries," he responded. I told him to back off anyway. Fast forward to when I got back from Syria. A few days had passed and I was starting to settle into a normal life again. Sarah brought up something she'd been holding back. "Mike," she said hesitantly, "there's something I need to tell you. An Army warrant officer tried messaging me on Facebook while you were away. He said I was beautiful and asked for my number. I blocked him immediately." I was furious, but understood why she'd waited to tell me until I was back on home soil. The next day, I went to our department and spoke to my other superior, Captain Johnson. I told him what had happened. He sighed and said, "Leave it with me, Mike. I'll have a word with him." He had a chat with the warrant officer, but nothing substantial came of it. I felt deflated and even more pissed off. That was until our senior military officer, Colonel Hayes, came into our department. He welcomed me back and asked how my tour was. Still angry, I said, "It was good, sir, except for Warrant Officer Richards trying to get with my wife while I was away." He looked shocked. "What? Richards did that?" About an hour later, he emailed me saying he felt the need to do something official about this. I'd forgotten that the Colonel and Warrant Officer Richards belonged to the same regiment, so having one of his own behave like this had clearly struck a nerve. I told him the full story and provided screenshots of what Richards had said to Sarah. For this to go official, Sarah had to provide a statement. Unfortunately, Sarah is very non-confrontational and said she didn't want this to continue. I respected her wishes, but hatched a plan that would take 3 years to execute. The timing was crucial. I emailed the Colonel. "Sir, Sarah has declined to provide a statement. However, I feel the need for some formal recognition. Could Warrant Officer Richards write a letter of apology addressed to both Sarah and me, signed and dated?" This was granted, and I received the letter 2 days later. It read, "Corporal and Mrs. Thompson, I am writing this letter to apologize for the distress and anxiety that you both must have felt from the messages sent from my Facebook account. To Mrs. Thompson, no one should ever worry about going to work because of who might come through the door, especially when they have the added stress of a partner being operationally deployed. The anguish you must have felt is immeasurable, and for this, I sincerely apologize. To Corporal Thompson, being operationally deployed is stressful enough without added worries about family back home. Support from loved ones is what carries many through tough times while on tour. For any undue anxiety caused, I apologize. I regret any hurt and anguish caused by this issue and apologize wholeheartedly and unreservedly to you both. Signed, Warrant Officer Richards." Then I waited. I finished my time in Germany, moved back to the UK to my new base, and waited some more. Almost 3 years after receiving the apology letter, I looked up Richard's wife on Facebook. I'd known the whole time we were in Germany that he was married, his wife lived back in the UK, and he had routinely tried to cheat on her. I sent her the same screenshot I'd sent to the Colonel. I also sent pictures of the emails between the Colonel and myself where I'd requested the apology letter. I'd blacked out the Colonel's details. Lastly, I sent a picture of the apology letter signed and dated by her husband admitting what he'd done. Once I saw she'd read it, I blocked her, Richards, and all his friends who'd been in Germany at the same time. "Why wait 3 years? I remembered Richards saying, before he turned into a jerk and tried it on with Sarah, that he only had 3 years left to serve. If my timing was correct, he was months away from completing his 22 years and receiving a very nice pension. If his wife decided to go ahead with a divorce, she would take half of that pension, essentially messing up his finances for the rest of his life. As I hit the block button, Sarah walked in. "What are you up to?" she asked. I smiled. "Just tying up some loose ends, honey. How about we go out for dinner tonight?" She nodded. "Sounds great. You seem in a good mood." "Yeah," I replied, closing my laptop. "Let's just say justice has a way of working itself out." The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd be in a situation where I'd have to fight for the right to use my own swimming pool, but here we are. It all started when Karen and her family moved in next door about 6 months ago. At first, everything seemed fine. We exchanged polite hellos over the fence, and I even brought over a welcome basket filled with local treats. Little did I know that this seemingly normal family would turn my life upside down. I've lived in my house for over a decade. It's a modest place, but my pride and joy is the in-ground pool I had installed 5 years ago. I saved up for years to afford it, and it's been the perfect escape during our brutally hot summers. I've always been happy to share it with friends and family, hosting barbecues and pool parties throughout the season. About a month after Karen moved in, I noticed her kids peering over the fence, watching me swim. I didn't think much of it at first. Kids are naturally curious, right? But then I started hearing Karen's voice, encouraging them to take a closer look at our new pool. I found it odd, but brushed it off as a misunderstanding. One Saturday afternoon, I was shocked to find Karen and her entire family in my backyard, setting up pool chairs and inflatable toys. I rushed outside, completely bewildered. "Excuse me," I said, trying to keep my cool. "What's going on here?" Karen looked at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, we're just setting up for a little pool party. It's so kind of you to share your pool with the neighborhood." I was dumbfounded. "I'm sorry, but this is my private pool. I didn't agree to share it with the neighborhood." Her smile faltered for a second before returning, even more forced than before. "Don't be silly. All the houses on this street have shared access to this pool. The previous owners told us all about it when we bought the place." Now, I knew this was complete nonsense. I had the pool installed myself and had never agreed to any shared access arrangement. I tried to explain this to Karen, but she wasn't having any of it. "Listen," she said, her voice taking on a nasty edge. "I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull, but this pool belongs to all of us. If you have a problem with that, maybe we need to get the authorities involved." I was shocked by her audacity. "Karen, I'm telling you one last time, this is my pool, on my property. You and your family need to leave now, or I'll be the one calling the authorities." She glared at me, then turned to her husband. "Call the police. This man is trying to deny us access to our own pool." I couldn't believe what was happening. As her husband pulled out his phone, I ran inside to grab my pool installation documents and property deeds. By the time I returned, a police car was pulling up to the curb. 2 officers approached, looking confused by the scene before them. Karen immediately launched into a tirade about how I was trying to steal the neighborhood pool and demanding they arrest me for trespassing on my own property. I calmly explained the situation to the officers and showed them my documentation. They quickly realized what was going on and turned to Karen. "Ma'am," one officer said, "this pool is clearly private property belonging to this gentleman. You and your family need to leave immediately." Karen's face turned an alarming shade of red. "This is outrageous. We were promised access to this pool when we bought our house. I demand you arrest this man for fraud." The officers were losing patience. "Ma'am, if you don't leave now, we'll have to arrest you for trespassing. Your claims about promised access are a civil matter, not a criminal one." Realizing she was fighting a losing battle, Karen huffed and started gathering her things, muttering about lawsuits and injustice. As they left, she turned to me with a venomous glare. "This isn't over," she spat. I thought that would be the end of it, but Karen was true to her word. Over the next few weeks, she launched a campaign of harassment against me. She called the city to report non-existent code violations, tried to turn other neighbors against me with lies about stolen community property, and even attempted to sneak into my yard at night to use the pool. The final straw came when I caught her trying to damage my pool equipment, claiming she was just inspecting our property. I'd had enough. It was time to take legal action. I hired a lawyer and filed for a restraining order against Karen and her family. We gathered evidence of her harassment, including security camera footage of her trespassing and tampering with my property. When we went to court, Karen tried to maintain her ridiculous claim about shared pool access, but the judge saw right through her lies. Not only was the restraining order granted, but the judge also ordered Karen to pay for the damage she'd caused to my pool equipment and cover my legal fees. She was furious, screaming about appeals and higher courts as she was escorted out of the courtroom. The aftermath was blissfully quiet. Karen and her family put their house up for sale within a month, unable to face the embarrassment of their defeat. The new neighbors who moved in are lovely people who understand and respect property boundaries. As for me, I invested in better security cameras and a taller fence. I still enjoy my pool, perhaps even more now that I've successfully defended my right to it. Sometimes when I'm floating on a raft with a cold drink in hand, I chuckle at the absurdity of it all. Who would have thought I'd have to go to court to prove I own my own pool? In the end, Karen's entitlement and lies cost her a lot more than a pool membership ever would have. And me? Well, I learned the importance of standing up for myself and my property, no matter how outrageous the claims against me might be. Now, excuse me while I go for a swim in my pool. The next one is a petty revenge story. Far too many years ago, I worked in a retail plumbing store. There were two of us that worked the counter. The other guy, Tim, was, generally speaking, a very nice, well-mannered guy, always polite to everyone. He worked opening shift, I worked closing. Over the back fence of our parking lot was a chemical plant that manufactured fertilizer. They were the worst neighbors in so many ways, but one of the most obnoxious things they did was to have trucks arrive with various chemicals for their plant, and they'd just dump raw, powdered crap into the parking lot and have their workers, with no protective gear, start shoveling it into bags. We'd have to literally hose our cars off to be able to see to drive home at night. I'm amazed I never saw anyone working there with an extra hand growing out of their forehead. And one day, a bigger than usual truck, a tractor trailer, was parked up next to the gate into our back parking lot, close enough that Tim couldn't get past it to get to the back door without actually climbing over it. And the alarm system was configured such that there was only a delay to disarm it before it went off, and called the police. If you came in the back door, open the front door and we get charged by the police department for a false alarm. So he goes into the office next door and politely, and he was always polite, asks the driver to move it. The driver's response was, "Go feck yourself." Okay, well, that's anatomically unlikely, but still waters run deep. Ducking you is certainly possible. So, in climbing over the truck to get in, he notes that it's parked in a fire lane, and calls the cops, who hated this company as much as anyone, for good reasons, but that's another story. So they showed up quickly and told the driver, "There's a tow truck on the way, you have until it gets here to move your truck." The truck was moved quickly, but that's only the beginning of those still waters. There's still the sharp rocks at the bottom. From that day on, every time they unloaded one of their trucks onto the asphalt, he'd call the fire department, who handle hazmat situations. The first couple of times, their excuse was, well, the truck was broken and this was the only way we had to unload it. About the third time, they started writing citations, expensive citations. After a few more times, I came back from lunch one day to find a fire truck parked in the alley, and guys in hazmat suits taking core samples out of their parking lot. They apparently came within a few parts per million of having to pay to have the entire parking lot dug up and hauled off to a toxic waste dump, which in California would probably have cost them 7 figures. And it's federal law, so their friends in the city government couldn't protect them. But they were never rude to Tim again. Once we, or rather the kid who worked in the detailing shop we shared a building with, taught their stupid Doberman to stay out of our parking lot, they were still annoying, but not nearly as much so. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I, 33F, unexpectedly gave birth 2 months earlier than my due date. Thankfully, baby and I are doing great, and we've now made it home. As you can imagine, coming that early meant baby needed a rather long stay in the infant spa, NICU. Now that we're home and I've been able to process everything, I wanted to share a moment of malicious compliance that helped bring some levity to a really scary experience. One of the most important things for a baby, especially preemies, is skin-to-skin time, which is where mothers or fathers will be either topless or open their shirts to cuddle their infant. Baby struggled with jaundice, so our skin-to-skin time was very limited at first because of light therapy. We had been moved to a new location in the NICU right next to another baby and across from 2 others. A standard of care in the NICU is monitoring the baby's breathing, heart rate, and oxygen levels. These monitors look like an old-school tube TV and are approximately 16 inches by 16 inches and can display babies in other areas as well if the nurses need. So I'm new to this little care area, and I'm getting ready to set up the hospital-provided screen so I can get my skin-to-skin time, but realize I may end up blocking the monitor for the baby next to me from the nurse. I ask the nurse if she can still see or if my setup was blocking anything for her. Obviously, I don't want to interfere with the care of another patient. She tells me everything was good, so I settle in for some much-needed snuggles. Not even 10 minutes later, I feel someone in my space and look up to see a woman glaring down at me. Once I've made eye contact, Karen starts in on me, while topless and holding baby, so very vulnerable, about how I'm blocking the nurse from caring for her baby. When I try to explain I asked before setting things up, she refuses to listen and continues to lecture and gets more aggressive and angry about how I'm causing her baby not to receive appropriate care and am pushing her out of the care area. After all the emotional stress and frustration of being in the hospital, I finally snapped, looked at the nurse and told her to take away the screen. The nurse was horrified and started saying, "But your privacy." To which I replied firmly, "It would seem my privacy and modesty don't matter as much as Karen's comfort. Get rid of the screen." This pissed off Karen even more as she realized she'd have to spend the next hour staring at my topless self. She got very annoyed and uncomfortable, especially when the doctor's managing rounds and both got flustered and tried to insist I get a new screen. I may have been the AH, but I simply was done and stared right back and said, "According to my neighbor here, my privacy doesn't matter, so we all get to be uncomfortable. When I tell you, if looks could kill, I'd be dead." I'm not joking. The doctors didn't want to deal with it, and the nurses who had to deal with it were laughing quite a bit. They then brought the screen back out and tried to show Karen that they can totally see all her baby's stats on any monitor, so there was no reason for this outburst. I wish I could say this was the last time she freaked out about this, but she pulled this same kind of stunt almost every time I tried to snuggle my baby until her baby was finally discharged a week later. But seeing the look of shock on her face when I just forced everyone to look at my boobs is probably going to make me giggle every time I think of it. The next one is an entitled people story. I have made some posts here about my friend, so some of you might know what I'm talking about. I really need advice of what to do and if I should cut off my entitled friend. I feel so stuck on what to do. I met my friend in college back in 2019. When I met her, we became friends instantly. But with that, I learned about her horrible childhood trauma. Her parents came to the US illegally, and they are still here without status, and how her uncle assaulted her until she is the age of 17. As her friend, my heart was so broken for her, and I knew life isn't easy on her. Both her and I changed a lot since college, as one does. I met my fiancé, and she has a boyfriend. Her and the boyfriend are a match made in hell. The stuff she tells me makes me really not like this guy. She would tell me how they always argue, she claimed he cheated numerous of times, how he is forcing her not to take birth control, and they have unsafe intimacy. When they argue, he always screams at her to shut the duck up. The guy seems like a complete loser. Even with all their issues, she always looks past it or just forgives him. There are many times that I would plead for her to break up with him and it just never happened. Then she would say something like, "You know, I'm just learning from this all." She has also spent $1,500 on his birthday and Christmas gifts. She always just buys him stuff. Whenever we're out, she ends up buying him expensive clothes or food. I do buy clothes for my fiancé if I find something affordable that I know he'll like. But most of this girl's paycheck goes to buying her boyfriend stuff. She is in constant financial hardships because of it. She even sends DoorDash over to his job every time it comes time for lunch. The other night we went out to dinner and she decided to rush off when the bill came to call her boyfriend. I told her to wait and asked the lawyer for 2 separate checks. She told me she will zell it to me after her call, and when she came back she so happened to lose Wi-Fi service. She told me she'll send me the money when she gets home. It's been days and I still didn't get my money. With all of the horrible stuff she has told me about her boyfriend, she asked me if he can come to my wedding. I'm only having 50-60 people. It's going to be very cute and intimate. Plus, the times I've tried to meet him, it never happens. My friend would always say she wants to double date just for her to back out when I try to make it happen. The one time I almost met him, she was dropping off food for him. She insisted on parking a block away from his house and keeping me in the car. I told her it seems weird to park a block away from the house, and she decided to move the car closer. But she made me stay in the car, and it was very awkward to say the least. So I don't know how I can invite someone to my wedding that I'm not allowed to meet. I also feel like she's so self-absorbed. I was going through a rough patch. My fiancé and I had to do long distance for a bit due to having to apply for a K-1 fiancé visa. It was really hard on me not being with him, and I went to such a dark place. Luckily, I'm doing better now and we got approved. So my fiancé comes back in late August. I tried telling my friend how hard it's been on me, but somehow the conversation always goes back to her and her life. Since I stated my fiancé is Korean, I love him so very much and everything about his culture is so beautiful. I have been to South Korea a few times, and I'm going back in August. My friend knows how much I love his family and the culture. So the other night, my friend was ranting of how her cousin is dating a Korean-American guy, and that her aunt set her cousin up to date him to spite my friend. I asked her why and how that would spite her, and she said, "My aunt knows how much I love K-dramas and K-pop, so she definitely used that to get my cousin to date a Korean." I told her that Koreans aren't accessories to have, and really I questioned the legitimacy of this. She then went on by saying how much she loves her boyfriend and how she prefers having a black man over a Korean man. I don't know what else to do. I feel like my friend is just going down a dark hole. I tried suggesting therapy to her and she told me it's white people shit, so she wants no part in it. I feel so frustrated and upset with myself that I can't help her. But I don't know what else to do. I get so disgusted whenever she mentions the boyfriend and the relationship. Even if they are doing well, she reminds me constantly how well they are doing. I can't be happy for her because of how horrible this man is. I don't know what else to do to help her, and I just feel myself growing apart from her. I feel horrible saying it, but I find her unbearable now. I miss the friend I had back in 2019, and I don't know how else to get her back. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.